All right, everybody. This is the How to Hunt Turkey podcast. I'm your host, Dan Johnson. And today we are joined by a very special guest, a very knowledgeable guest, Mr. Patrick Wightman. My man, how are you doing today?
Good, Dan. It's springtime. Turkeys are gobbling, and I've been in and out of the woods, and so
Yeah,
yeah, life's good for me.
that's good, dude. Have you had good encounters? Have you pulled the trigger? What's the deal?
Yeah. So I've been fortunate enough to harvest two birds so far this spring. I kicked off my season in Florida. Had a successful hunt myself, and was a part of a couple other successful hunts while I was down there. Came back. I live in Georgia, hunt mostly public land in Georgia. I got my butt whooped for the first couple weeks here in Georgia, and then
Yeah.
struck out with my dad and went to Indiana. Both of us had successful hunts there. Um, and yeah, I'm going to Wyoming next week.
Oh,
So that's kind of
wow.
been my season in a nutshell so far.
You going to eastern or western Wyoming?
Casper area.
Okay, so is
Yeah.
that Merriam country?
Yes.
Yeah,
Yeah.
dude. Like
Yeah.
that's probably the like I'm not I don't know. I like turkey hunting. I also am not into like the Grand Slam thing. And like I
Hmm.
don't have I someday it'd be nice to go do it. I just it's not on a priority list of mine. The only thing that I want to do is get a Merriam.
Yeah.
And so I think that in the next handful of years, I got an old high school buddy. I think we might try to pull the trigger on getting something set up to go out west and shoot a Merriam.
Yeah, no, I totally get that. Now I'm excited. I've never been out west, never harvested a Merriam myself. I've only ever killed Easterns up until this year. I was, down in Florida, so got an Osceola, and then maybe a Merriam's this year. But yeah, up until this point, I've been similar, just on running up and down the East Coast.
Well, dude, if you get a Merriam this year, you gotta go try for a Rio, right?
I
Like
know that's
you just
that's what
gotta
I've
take them
been
the long
told.
way home. Take the
Yeah.
long way home.
I'm not sure I'll still be married when I get back, but
Dude,
if I'm successful, the thought will cross my mind. I'm looking at, okay, I've got a couple weeks of season left where Rio's open. Okay, that's
yeah,
northwest, Pacific territory, so it'd be
yeah,
quite the haul. But to your
yeah,
point, I'm not really into the. I mean, to say I got a single season slam would be cool, but to me, it's more about the places you harvest them,
yeah.
and the interactions and the people with than it is about, the accolades. But that's just me
Yeah,
personally.
absolutely, man. Because that stuff's at the end of the day, that stuff's fun, man.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's this, chasing 49, doing the subspecies. I'm sure you're aware of, which
Yep.
I, I, I mean, me personally, I think it's good. But for me, it's like I don't really care about the number of states or the subspecies. Like, to me, it's about you're harvesting these birds in all of these unique landscapes that they live
Right.
in. And to me, that's the experience. Being able to hunt
Yeah.
them from the swamps of Florida to, the mountains in Wyoming and all over. Like, I like just seeing the vast places that the wild turkey survives and thrives, and then
Yeah.
being immersed into that ecosystem and hunting them.
100%.
That's awesome to me. So
100%. 100%. All right. We got to talk some business now.
sure.
I do have to send a quick shout out to the partners over at Montana Decoy. If your guys are looking for a decoy that is packable, it's lightweight, it looks realistic, and the turkeys are going to come into it, they're going to get you in that bubble. Go check out montanadecoy.com. They have turkey decoys, they have antelope, they have mule deer, they have whitetails, elk, everything you need when it comes to decoying. montanadecoy.com. All right. Let's talk a little bit about what it is you do for a living. So why don't you explain that part of your title and what organization you work for?
Yeah, so about a little over 3 months ago, I took a position with the NWTF, National Wild Turkey Federation, and my title is National Director of Wild Turkey Research and Science.
Okay.
So kind of what that means, I guess, in layman's terms, or kind of just at a 500-foot level, is I oversee the kind of research portfolio and the research arm of the NWTF. So over the last 4 years, the NWTF's probably invested, well, not probably, has invested right around $2.3 million directly in research with Match with Partners. It's up over $23 million. And that's 36 different projects across 26 different states. So my job is kind of being the liaison between those investigators, whether it be state agency or universities, kind of being the liaison between them and the organization, making sure that the questions we're asking from a research perspective are benefiting managers and benefiting the organization, and ultimately, benefiting the bird. And then doing kind of the outreach aspect of it as well, right? Getting on podcasts with guys like you and
Hmm.
and others, and making sure that the research that we're conducting and the results that we're finding are the stories being told,
Yeah.
of what we're finding and what that means for the wild turkey. And so that's, yeah, there's a lot more kind of to my duties, but I think at a 500-foot level, that's what I'm doing.
When it comes to these research projects, how do you guys make the ultimate decision on what research project you guys put your dollar and energy into?
Yeah, so that's a great question. And so how it works is, we have a really good relationship with what we call the Turkey Technical Committee. So that is the state agency biologist or multiple from each state across the country that is charged with managing the turkey population. And so each year we sit down multiple times with the Turkey Technical Committee and come up with a list of priorities, essentially
Hmm.
research priorities and questions that they foresee necessary to help them do their job,
Okay.
to manage the wild turkey. And from there, we solicit a request for proposals. So we just actually announced the 2026 request this year for our research grants program, and we list those four priorities. Uh, Project investigators, essentially people from academia, will get some state agency folks that apply for grant funding from the NWTF. It has to be a 3-to-1 match, meaning for every dollar that we supply, they have to have $3 to match that with, whether that's from Pittman Robertson dollars, state dollars, or some other funding source. Just kind of a way to make sure the dollars are being kind of stretched and having a bigger impact. And then once we get all of those proposals, we rank them internally as staff members, and then also the technical committee. So they provide rankings, they're reviewed. This year, I'm adding in a layer of an academic review if necessary for certain complex proposals. If we deem necessary that we need someone from academia to provide their input, then they will do so. And then, yeah, once the rankings kind of shake out, we see which projects ranked the highest, and then based on, the amount of funding that we have, it does vary each year. In the research department on how much money we have to actually allocate towards research based on grants that we've received or
Hmm.
donations and funding. Bass Pro Shopping Cabela's have been a big supporter of the research program over the last 4 years. So have other donors and grants that we've achieved. And so we kind of, once we get those rankings, then it's kind of up to myself, the CEOs, and the national board. I kind of present what I think based on the rankings, projects that we should fund, and the amount of money that we have, and then from there we decide, how to allocate the dollars.
Awesome. So it sounds like it's not just pulling a name out of a hat. There's
Mm.
actually a lot of a lot of details that go into the decision making,
Yeah, absolutely. And and from a research science perspective, that's important, right? We want to make
right?
sure that these projects have integrity. They're answering questions that are potentially the most impactful for the bird, and that the investigators actually have the ability and the resources to get the final result, which is the
Yeah.
most important.
Out of all of the research projects that have happened in the last year, or that make it to the final decision, okay, we are going to do this project, or we're going to put money towards this project. Is it all habitat based? Is it numbers based? Is it like what how do you rank these little categories of, cuz let me back up. The goal is to benefit the wild turkey, right?
Correct.
But not all environments require the same thing.
Correct.
How how do you break it down to the point where know what you're actually addressing in that environment?
Yeah, sure. So, I mean that's complex. I'll try to do my best. But essentially I think what you're getting at is that, in different regions or different sections of the country, right, the challenges are different for the wild
Hmm.
turkey, and how do we ensure that our research is benefiting all regions. And so, as I mentioned earlier, we have projects in 26 different states across all of those regions. From a NWTF perspective, we kind of break that into the West, the Southeast, the Northeast, in the Midwest. Those five different hubs. And so, like I said, there's representatives from each of those in the state agencies, and so we try to make sure there's representation across all of those regions, but also, we have to recognize that certain regions, are under more, I would say, crucial need in terms of where the population's at, right? In terms of
Yeah.
decline, stability. And so those go into consideration as well. So I would say, in the last 4 years, while we've done it across 26 different states, there's a little bit of bias, I would say, in the research projects in the Southeast. And that's because I think, most researchers would agree that from a decline perspective, the Southeast is the one that's struggling the most and the most critical. And so there has been a little bit more resources pulled in the Southeast. But with that being said, there we are still doing research across all of those regions. And then, yeah, to your question about the individual topics, right? So kind of the main things that we see these research projects span. Now I'm trying to boil this down really into the
Yeah, I
500
know. I
foot
know it's a
level, but
complex question.
it's like disease monitoring, right? So that's a big one that you see probably equally across all regions. That's important, right? Making sure that there's not diseases popping up in our population that's drastically causing, declines and that need further research. So that's kind of almost a monitoring that kind of goes on by state agencies in the background. And we've helped fund projects to continue that monitoring, to increase monitoring, or also better the techniques that these investigators and disease ecologies have to help them process, blood samples and monitor that. And so we've kind of had our hand in that from a funding perspective. Looking at abundance estimates. So that's a big one that we've been funding in the last 4 years. And so that's just trying to find out ways to accurately measure turkey populations, both at the local and regional scale.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of people are like, man, why is that like why is that important? Do we not know how many it is? And it's actually relatively complex. Turkeys spend most of their times in wooded habitats, not in all of the areas where they live, but it's hard to count turkeys, right? Unlike deer, they don't have unique horns or antlers that really stand out where you can get an idea of unique individuals.
Yeah.
Um, and so why it's important is, I try to tell people, it's like, how can you manage something you don't even know how many there are of? Like,
Yeah.
these state agency folks need to be able to know a relatively good idea of how many birds there are on the landscape. And then from a research perspective or even a management perspective in general, when we're making changes, whether it's harvest changes, changes to habitat, trying to understand the effects of predator removal on populations, if we don't have a way to track the actual abundance or number of turkeys after implementing management, then it's hard to gauge kind of
Yeah.
where our targets are hitting. So the abundance question is definitely a big one and is still a priority on the list this year in 2026.
Yeah.
Um, and then, yeah, like I said, I think in there I hit on, habitat,
Yeah.
predation, harvest regulations, season changes. Those are all priorities this year, and understanding exactly how that influences abundance and reproduction. Let me see what
Yeah.
other
Well,
priorities.
I would
Trapping is
say,
is another priority that we have.
yeah. Yeah.
um,
Well, if you do the predator control, you do the habitat work, but you don't allocate any funds to research what the outcome of that is by doing, population counts or things like that, then it's almost like everything you've done, it probably would benefit them, but you don't know if it did or not, right?
Correct. And that's kind
Yeah.
of where we're at in the turkey world, honestly, from a research perspective, right? Is we've done a lot of observational studies and with the increases in technology, gotten a lot of detail about kind of the ecology of this bird, the
Hmm.
the the presser the pressures that they face in different regions, and we understand like, okay, we need to have brood rearing habitat in close proximity to nesting
Yeah.
cover. But when we go talk to a landowner about implementing that type of habitat on their property, the question we get is, well, what can I expect to see in return? This takes time and money.
Yeah.
And right now it's like, well, we know this is good for the bird, but we don't have like a really good idea on how much reproductive increases we could see and what that means from a population standpoint. So
Right.
I think we're getting there though. And I think science is evolving, and I think we'll be
Yeah.
able to answer those questions moving forward.
So uh, the state. I want to talk about the state of the wild turkey in North America, because in the last handful of years, and let's go back as far as 5 to 7 years, you just hear turkey hunters say bad things about the numbers that are on the landscape. Have you guys done any, or like, have the research that you've done resulted in any more in-depth knowledge about why there seems to be a reduction in the numbers?
Yeah, I mean that's that's a golden ticket question, right? Like what's causing population declines? Um, and honestly, I mean this isn't a cop out answer. You hear it all the time. It's death by a thousand cuts, and like we've
Yeah.
talked about earlier, it varies by region. But in my honest opinion, the number one thing is just habitat loss and
Yeah.
habitat fragmentation and degradation, and that kind of all goes hand in hand, right? It's
Yeah.
the loss of habitat, and then not only that, the habitat that's left over, the quality of that habitat is decreasing, and then populations become fragmented.
Yeah.
And so there's just less travel and dispersal and repopulating going on in that
Yeah.
type of chopped up landscape.
This is where I have I don't know any of the research, right? I've never done a project like this. But it seems to me that based off of the people that I've talked to who have done this, that habitat is very important.
Hmm.
But there is something about predator control with their nests being on the ground, and so many skunks, possums, raccoons, the biggest one, that the the nest predator contribution to the reduction seems to be weighed a little bit higher than the rest of the 1,000 cuts that are out there. Okay, so what I mean by that is, and I'm using multiple examples of people that I know who, for an entire year, have who have made it a commitment on their farms to remove raccoons or trap uh, skunks, possums from the landscape. And they've done that successfully. And that has resulted in a boom in the turkey populations on their farms. Um, do you have any additional information about any projects or programs or trapping, predator removal from the landscape that would be helpful for people who are trying to grow the turkey populations on their properties?
Yeah, and so it's like I said, it's one of the priority questions that we've come up with this year, and so we're interested in funding research around that question. But to your point, no, there's no research out there currently right now. There might be
Mhm.
research being conducted, but there's no actually published research focused on turkeys that has documented um, that trapping results in X number of increase in wild turkeys or poults or survival
Right.
outside of some studies that were done in the 1980s, where they did see positive increases in turkey numbers post trapping, but that the trapping that occurred was poison. So they literally went out and put poison on the landscape and killed very very high numbers of predators. And then yes, they did see increases
Hmm.
in turkey populations. And so what I always tell people is that I always go back to other game bird literature. So the bobwhite quail is one of them. And they have documented in research reductions in predators can result in increases in quail populations. I think that, there's similarities to be drawn there from turkeys. It's not, identical, but it's a piece of evidence that suggests it can make a difference. But what that research shows essentially, and what I try to tell people, is that habitat needs to happen first, or is going to be the larger increase in your population. And meaning that if you go in and you have really bad if you have really bad habitat and you go in and you trap, the results that you could expect to see in terms of population growth are going to be much less than if you're doing the habitat work first. Habitat work is predation management. The better the habitat is, the reduction in predator influence, because you're creating quality habitat that favors turkeys and not predators.
Yeah.
And so it kind of goes hand in hand. But the research that is out there currently right now would suggest your biggest bang for your buck is to do habitat work, and once you get that on the landscape, then trapping, and then you can potentially see increases in population. And that's my viewpoint, kind of lies there. I have to look at it as a collective of
Right.
research, and unfortunately, from a turkey world, we don't have that actual study that we can point to. But
Yeah.
I think we will have that information, hopefully.
Yeah.
Whether it's in the next 5 years, 6 years, or whatever. That's a big research project and undertaking, because not only do you have to account for trapping, you have to account for how often do you do it, as close to the nesting and brood rearing as possible. At what scale is it meaningful? If you go out and put 10 coon cuffs on the landscape, is that going to impact, or do you have to have box traps on the landscape for 365 days a year to have an
Yeah.
impact? Do you focus on just nest raiders? Do you focus on coyotes and bobcats as
Hmm.
well? And then, like we just mentioned, we know habitat's going to influence some of that. So then you have to account for that variation in habitat across study sites. And quite frankly, Dan, that's why it hasn't really been answered yet in wild
Yeah.
turkeys, is because it's a difficult question. And for the scale of the wild turkey, you're talking an average home range is 3,000 acres, let's say, roughly, for one individual. And so to impact, you have to have a large chunk of land to do, your
Do
predator
studies
removal,
on.
your habitat management, and it takes time. And so,
Yeah.
unlike the quail, whose home range is really tiny and you can control a very specific area on the landscape, that's why the research isn't there for turkeys. But like I said, I'm hopeful that we'll be able to focus on that moving forward. And just like you, I mean, I get it every spring, all the time. The questions about predator trapping and what it means for turkeys, and I encourage it. I think it's great for
Yeah.
people to get out there, great to be in the great outdoors. You understand, and when you start trapping, you start to understand a lot more about wildlife in the landscape as well. And so I don't see a negative in it,
Hmm.
per se. I just like to tell people, tailor your expectations, right? Like
Yeah.
it's, and without habitat, I don't know how much of an impact you're truly going to make.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, it's part of the equation. But I like what you did there, like what you said there, and it's basically like it's almost a very simple. It's simple. Start with a habitat, and then if that didn't do the trick, maybe do some trapping. And those are really some of the only things that you can control, really, when it comes to like disease, right?
Correct.
Um, is this? I want to talk about disease a little bit because I've heard a couple things, and maybe you could tell me if it's BS or not. But some of these diseases are natural and they're around the natural, like they go through bird populations and things like that. And then some of them are not. There's crossover from like turkey farming or
Correct.
agriculture practices and things like that, maybe through pesticides and um, fertilizers or some things like that. What information can you tell us about that?
Yeah, so I mean, you're spot on there. Both of those avenues exist. What I would say from a disease perspective, in totality, from a research side of things, is it varies by region. And I don't think it's the smoking gun for the massive declines that we've seen in particular regions. But I think from a localized perspective, to your point, whether it's LPVD or REV. These are, viruses that are transferred from, domesticated fowl into the wild populations. If you have a turkey population near one of those farms and there seems to be crossing, it can at a local level potentially be detrimental to the survival of the bird and the population. But from a research side of things, we don't see mass die off um, currently right now in the literature. I think there's some work going on that would suggest that maybe there is one disease in particular that's having a little bit higher of an impact, but that work's not published yet, and so I'd rather not I'd rather
Right.
not speak on it. Um, but where we're kind of going and where some of the research is going is not only monitoring that disease, but given that we don't see drastic decreases in survival at a population scale, the questions start to become, well, does it influence reproduction?
Right.
Is it having these, if 80% of the population has LPVD, which we see in a lot of these study sites, it doesn't seem to be having an effect on survival. Well, what about reproduction? Is it, these birds that are in less healthy conditions, maybe aren't as reproductively, viable or putting as much energy into reproduction as they should be. And so there are some studies going into that, and yeah, there should be results coming out soon. But yeah, I hope that kind of answers
Yeah.
your disease question. It's definitely part of the equation, and I think in certain regions it's more impactful than others. And trying to unpack that from a research side of things is
Yeah.
we're working on it.
Do you ever use any of the research outcomes or outcome of the studies that you do and pass that on to the state agencies, and not necessarily say you should reduce tags, but give input on like, hey, this is what our research has shown. It might be beneficial if you did this to your rules and regulations to maybe adopt new practices or new rules for the turkey seasons.
Yeah, and so yeah, I kind of got to think about this in two different hats. So like I said, I
Mm,
just started with the NWTF. And so that's a little different than my previous role where I was a research professor at the University of Georgia.
yeah,
And so in the professor position, I would say the answer to that was no.
yeah,
We were hired to collect data, analyze that data, and provide state agencies with the results, similar to how we fund those projects. With my new role at the NWTF, and then ultimately it's up to those state biologists, and then it goes most of the time voting to legislation about the changes that they should potentially make if
hmm,
they're depending on where their populations are at or what the research found. Um, Obviously, in my new role with the NWTF, I think there are times when they look at the research and then make a statement about whether they support a policy change or not. And that typically happens at the state level and our state chapters wanting to support based on what the research says. Um, but no, as a researcher, it's really not. We don't. The NWTF and academics don't make law. Like, we don't make regulations. We collect data, we support research that state agencies then have to digest and adapt their regulations accordingly. And so while try to do research and support research that helps them make those decisions. We're not the ones making, those changes. Now, not to say, you might not have a research project that the NWTF funds or that we conduct as an academic that's like, hey, we're considering or we're going to change the bag limit from 3 to 1 or on a particular study site, or we're going to delay the season by 6 days.
hmm,
And then we'll do research on how that impacted the said population, which would then inform them. That's a very direct kind of, like,
yeah,
to your question, like in that sense, if the research question is that, and we find that, yeah, moving it to from,
yeah.
this is hypothetical, from 3 to 1, it made a difference. Delaying the season, it made a difference, or it did not. But ultimately, that typically goes back to legislation and a vote,
Yeah.
and then that's
Do
how that works.
do state or federal agencies ever reach out to you and say, hey, we need some help with the turkey population in this region or this part of the state? Anything that you guys could do to help us out would be awesome. Like, do you get requests like that?
Yeah, I mean, essentially that's how the request for proposals that we just
Okay.
announced and those priorities, like that's the state agencies sitting in a room together, talking out loud, in particular state agency biologists going,
Mhm.
hey, well, our constituents are, they're beating us up about the effects of predator trapping, like we just talked about. Like, can you advocate for research that helps answer this question? Or
Yeah.
we're, as a state, interested in this. We're going to put up X amount of dollars. Can we partner together? You add money as well, and then help us find researchers to answer that question.
Yeah.
Yeah, that happens frequently. Same thing with season changes,
Mhm.
habitat work, disease related stuff. Yeah, that's how our kind of our whole research avenue from the NWTF perspective works, which I think is what makes us unique.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. Okay. So one of the last times we talked, you kind of educated me on the impact of owls and
oh yeah,
on what they have on roosted birds, right? And you were
yep.
able to generate a hypothesis based off of was it like movement or uh, fill us in because I have a follow up question on that.
Sure. Yeah. So what that research study that was published, what I was talking about, was essentially looking at very specific times in which predation mortality was occurring for
Mm,
um, wild turkeys. And so up until this point, the way that we've determined potentially what predator was responsible um, would be looking at carcasses once we get out into the field, once we realize that a mortality happens. And so from
mhm.
a great horned owl perspective, what you would see is decapitated, just the breast meat gone, and then you would classify, hey, that was an owl kill. The issue with that is everything scavenges on these birds, and you don't
Right.
know exactly, what was the initial blow that caused mortality. And so yeah, with these new GPS units we have, they have accelerometers built into them, which is just kind of like the same technology that's in your Fitbit watch, that tracks activity and motion. And so what this allowed us to do is to look at it and pinpoint exact like time of
Mhm.
when mortality occurred. And so what I was interested in that particular research was looking at the very fine scale timing of mortality, and kind of what came out of that is, or a hypothesis that we had, and a conclusion that we drew was, for our males, predation rates were around 15%. And so, if you had 10, you'd get about 1.5 birds or two birds that
Yeah.
would get predated each year. 50% of those mortalities occurred in the middle of the night when they were on a limb, roosted. And so to me, the connection that I drew there was, well, in those ecosystems, the only predator that's killing them at night off of the limb in a tree would be a great horned owl. So we hypothesized that 50% of adult male mortality was occurring due to great horned owls. From females, it was about a third of their predation that was happening on the limb. But with that, we're missing potential owl kills from females when they were nesting or
Mhm.
brood rearing, because I just had to use that cutoff of like, hey, if
Yeah.
they're on the ground, I can't say it was an owl, but I could be, underestimating it, but I don't think I was overestimating.
Yeah.
Um,
That's that you talking about that. I can just imagine an owl dive bombing a turkey without it even having a clue that it's coming for him, you
oh
know.
yeah, and
They're
if
such
you've watched their videos, they're like silent predators too.
Oh
Like
yeah.
it's just they come out of nowhere.
Exactly. Exactly. Okay, so the reason I wanted to bring that up is has there been because that to me that's just kick-ass information, right? Um have you gathered any other cool kick-ass information or research to share with us today about like some things that you've found or very interesting facts about what you've learned about wild turkey in the last couple of years?
Oh man, that's yeah, that's a big one. I mean, there's a lot constantly learning.
Yeah.
I nerd out on this stuff. Hmm, I, I don't know. The last time we talked, was I talking about the individual gobbling stuff, like putting the actual sound recorders on the back of birds?
I don't
Uh,
know. I think we maybe I think you started it, but I don't know if we ever talked about the outcome of it.
yeah, and so I don't have a complete outcome data of
Yeah.
for that yet, but for your listeners, yeah, within the last 2 years, and this is I'm not going to say this is the most impactful for the bird, but you were asking me kind of like cool stuff
Yeah,
that we
dude, if you're
found
putting a
out. So
microphone on a back of a
yeah,
tom turkey and
yeah.
recording his gobbles, that's pretty badass, dude.
Yeah, and so the first year, I think it was right after I talked to you, we were just implementing that study. And the
Yeah.
first year, we had problems. As you can imagine, you put a microphone on the back of a bird, brand new technology, never done before. The issue that we ran into is that the turkey gobble was so loud that it was clipping our microphone, meaning like
Ah, yeah.
and we also had our microphone a little too sensitive. The company that I was working with assured me that it was in the right ranges and everything, and I learned a lesson there. Don't trust what everyone
Right.
says. We probably should have tested, but it all happened really fast in term from an implementation standpoint.
Yeah.
Because we like found the technology and we only had 2 years worth of traffic left, and so we had to work quick to
Yeah.
implement it. But yeah, so I mean, it was so loud we could hear the heart beating on the turkey, the sensitivity of the microphone, like sitting on its back. Like you could hear the heart, you could hear the scratching, spitting, and drumming, and then you'd hear like the heart rate ramp up, and then it would just go blank, and it would just blank out, and you're like,
Yeah.
oh man, like I'm pretty sure that's a gobble,
Yeah.
but no way of knowing. So we actually went in and recorded with our audio loggers that we normally just put in trees, like same mornings with birds that had audio loggers on the back, and figured out that's what it was. But going into this spring, we fixed that, changed the sensitivity settings, and I've gotten 3 recordings back so far where it works 90% of the time, meaning that like you can actually hear the gobble, but when it gets to the loudest part of the gobble, it clips. But it's
Okay.
like, but you can hear it this time. So it's like, and then it just clips and then you hear the
Yeah.
trail. So it's not as bad. It varies depending on individual bird and how loud their gobble is, the effect on that. But so the fact that we've actually recording it, we're doing it, I can hear spitting and drumming and the purring and the whips and the whines that they make. It is really cool, and I think there will be a good bit of information moving forward that we can garner from that, essentially helping those abundance estimate questions
Yeah.
that we were talking about earlier. If we have an understanding of detection probability, how often birds gobble, it helps inform models when we try to use just static recordings throughout a season of
Interesting.
how many individuals are on the ground. And then ultimately, the gold standard, which there's been research conducted that shows you can do this, is once you have individual voice recognition down, you can essentially pull out individuals just by the variation in their calls. No difference than voice recognition, that police might use for me and you.
Yeah.
Um, it's just that's whether we'll get there or not, I don't know. I'm being told it's about a 50%, chance.
Yeah.
But I think it's cool. We're doing a lot of genetic work on all of these birds as well. And so we'll kind of get an idea of looking at, is there a genetic component to it? Are there certain strands or gene lines where birds are wired differently to gobble more versus ones that are more quiet? Are we selecting the ones that gobble more? Are we creating harder turkeys to hunt? Like there's a plethora of cool questions that can come from actually having audio on the back of a bird. Now, I do have to remind myself at times, like this is the scientist nerd side of me. It's like
Yeah.
stay management focused, right? Like you
Right.
got to make sure that what you're finding is applicable and applied, and we can make differences for the population. But
Yeah.
from a
Yeah.
technology side of things, that one's really kind of cool.
Yeah. That would be crazy because over the however many years turkey hunting has been a thing across the landscape, if hunters are, they're obviously going after turkeys who gobble more, I'm assuming. And because of that, then we're taking that genetic line out. And so what you have left is turkeys that don't gobble as much, meaning it becomes harder to hunt them, which will increase the population, but success rates go down. I don't know. That's just my nerd brain working.
Yeah, yeah,
Like
no, and like I said, this is all hypothetical. We don't have
yeah,
research that suggests any of this, but interestingly enough, like there is research on other species. Like there's research on rattlesnakes in Texas when they started with the bounty down there and killing them, and then how rattling they found a decrease in the number of snakes that were rattling on the landscape. Essentially, they were selecting through that bounty program
yeah,
more vocal, or not vocal, but snakes that rattled. And then there's fish literature as well, essentially showing that you can artificially select for a more aggressive, I think it was bass on beds. And then over time, if you just keep all of the aggressive ones, that you eventually are left over with less aggressive fish, less likely to bite. And so there's research out there that suggests you can do it. And in my honest opinion, to think that we're not doing that somewhat to turkeys, I think I think we
yeah,
are. But then again, like the whole shot gobble, this, that, like
yeah.
sometimes they just can't control it either. But
Right,
so
right,
research there would be
right.
curious to see, but I think there is a good bit of individual variation there.
Well, the cool thing is that right now in the United States somewhere, there is a microphone or multiple microphones on multiple turkeys recording everything that they're doing in a day. So,
But yeah, it's only the first hour, unfortunately.
oh,
But
only the first hour. Okay.
we get
Okay.
like 75 minutes, and the reason being is that it's just a data storage thing, right? So like wave files are heavy. They're gigabyte heavy. And so we're limited to the size of the units we can put on these birds.
Mm,
And so yeah, and also I want to stretch that out for across the spring as much as possible. So
yeah.
that gives us over I think right around 2.5 months worth of data. Um,
Nice.
so and I was focused around, first thing in the morning, because that's when, 80% of gobbling activity occurs within 90 or an hour of sunrise,
Right.
really. And
Right.
so that was from a calling perspective where we were focusing. But over time, I think we'll be able to record more and more. And then from a
Yeah.
predation standpoint, maybe that'll allow us to, the accelerometers are cool, but it's kind of hard to pull out all of that nuanced
Yeah.
data.
Yeah.
But sound in and of itself might be easier to pull out. Like I'm always interested in, like, when do birds fly up? When do they fly down? Do they roost
Hmm.
switch? Like questions like that.
Yeah.
And
Lots of cool things, man. I think it would be cool to have a turkey. You record it that first hour of the day. It flies out of the tree and then it starts to gobble. And then in the distance, you hear like a hen, and then it starts working its way closer to that hen. The hen call gets louder, and then it's a gigantic shotgun load to the face, and then you record somebody walking up to it and it's like, I got him. I don't know
yeah,
why that I don't know why that popped into my head, but that would be
well,
cool to listen to
well,
something like that.
yeah, we have it, and I've listened to it.
What are no shit? Are you serious?
Yeah, but not on the individual ones yet. So
Okay.
the individual ones, I have heard hens calling to them, and gobblers gobbling and spitting and drumming, and you can hear
Okay.
them in the leaves come and meet up. But from a successful hunt perspective, hearing a guy calling to a gobbler and the gobbler getting closer, and then the shotgun blast, and then the flapping, and then the cheering and everything, like with the audio recorders that we have hung in trees on these WMAs, yeah,
Oh
I've
my
listened to
god, dude.
multiple of those situations, man.
Can you share that with me?
Yeah, I can
Are
try to
you
pull.
allowed to?
Yeah, I don't see why not. Honestly, it's just finding it. I'm
Okay.
sure I've saved it somewhere, because
Okay.
I've been doing this since 2015.
Yeah.
And I know two of those were in 2015, 16.
Okay.
And I think I have them on an old laptop, but I'll look.
No pressure, but I think that'd be kick ass to share.
Yeah.
So
We've heard all sorts of crazy things, man, like hunts being busted, like in terms of you hear the bird coming, cell phone rings out loud, the guy goes to cussing. I've had people mess with us on the recorders, like I've had guys like talking to it, like, or just like they'll sit underneath it and clearly they're gobbling on a box call, like just messing with me. Like
yeah.
I can just hear it. I've
Yeah.
had numerous guys check in their bird on speakerphone underneath the microphone, like welcome to the Georgia Department of Natural Resources. Please record your harvest. And it's like, okay,
That's cool,
guys,
dude.
good job. Like, you're trying to make sure that we understand it. I've had guys decorate the trees with feathers. Yeah, we've heard and seen quite a bit.
That's awesome, man. That's awesome. Okay, well, as we wind down here, um, what do we need to know about the wild turkey? From right now moving forward, and we in a good spot? We in a oh no spot? Like, where are we at?
Um, I think it varies by region. When you break it down, like I said, I think the Southeast is still struggling. Historically compared to where they've been. There are some
Mhm.
states that are seeing increases in populations. The Northeast, I think it really depends on where you're at. I think there's certain states that are pretty stable. There's states that are declining, and then you hear of states that are growing.
Mhm.
Um, Midwest, I think altogether, if you look at it, similar but mostly decreasing. Um, and then in the West, I think it's just very weather driven out there. It seems like you're having booms and busts, but it's weather climate related, and those populations staying pretty healthy.
Yeah.
This year, I think you're going to see and have seen, and there's reports of this, that 2 years ago, specifically in the east, there was a cicada hatch, and there was high pulp production and survivals, and so the harvest rates are higher this year in a lot of states than historically speaking. But I think that's tied to the availability of 2-year-olds on the ground. The
Mhm.
number of birds that are out there gobbling. We disproportionately harvest 2-year-olds. Research have shown the survival of a 2-year-old's 50%. So
Yeah.
50% of your 2-year-olds are living, and the other half are dying, and that's
Mhm.
that's just from a harvest perspective.
Yeah.
And so I think that's good. I think that harvest will increase. We're seeing increases, in production from 2 years ago, but don't also let that cloud the bigger picture of what might be going on in your particular state in terms of declines, or whether populations are stable. I would say, regardless, I think as a turkey hunter, something that everybody can do is get involved one way or another in terms of conservation for the wild turkey, for
Mhm.
the next generation of hunters, and for the turkeys in general. Obviously, from the NWTF side, I think I'm biased there, but becoming a member of an organization like that, you can surround yourself around a community of like-minded people who enjoy hunting, but also you'll find people there that enjoy the conservation of the species as well, and they'll have ideas on how you can get involved. And
Yeah.
I get this one a lot. It's like, well, I don't own land, I can't influence land, I'm a public land hunter. I would argue that everybody at least knows somebody who owns a piece of ground that you could at least just talk to them about, whether it's habitat work or
Right.
what have you, or being a part of something bigger. But um, I feel like there's been a lot of talk recently about the doom and gloom that people are preaching in the turkey world, and
Yeah.
I don't want to be that. I don't want to be that guy. There's still plenty of birds out there. There's still plenty of opportunities. It might just look a little differently than it did 15, 20 years ago. And ultimately, I think the conservation of the wild turkey depends on turkey hunters. That's the reason why we have hunting seasons. That's the reason why, you know, they they exist, after being dang near extirpated. It was off the backs of turkey hunters and researchers that, we have the populations that we can enjoy today. And so don't forget that.
Right.
Um,
Right.
think about that moving forward, and enjoy the spring. I know I sure have enjoyed my time out there this year, and I hope everybody else is as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, we appreciate what you're doing, the work that you're doing, the NWTF, and everybody over there, and I think this was a fun little episode where we didn't get into how to hunt them, but all the things that actually matter in the research and things like that. So,
Yeah.
Patrick, man, I really appreciate you taking time out of your day to hop on and chat with us a little bit. And uh, I'm going to end with this question: is there a place that we can go and maybe find some of the research projects? If there's people who want to go read them and look into them, where can we find that at?
Absolutely. So NWTF.org, you can go to a research section on there, and there online and in Turkey Call magazine, you can read articles about specific projects that we've funded over the last 4 years. what the questions they're asking, where they're at. You can see maps of all the different states that we funded over the years. So I would encourage people to do that. In my position now, like I said, I just started 3 months ago. One of my goals is to make sure that we are doing a not that they were doing a bad job, but just doing a good job of
Yeah.
communicating the finding of those studies and what we're funding, and whether I'm doing that via podcasts, social media, YouTube videos with influencers. Like I think it is important for people to understand how much the NWTF is doing and trying to help this bird, and getting that information out there is critical. Like I said, it can be found on the website and in the magazine, but I think we need to try other avenues as
Yeah.
well to get that information out there in this day and age. And then another plug I would make, I'm sure most of your listeners are familiar with Dr. Michael Chamberlain, who's the endowed professor, the NWTF endowed professor at UGA, and was a colleague of mine when I was at
Hmm.
UGA. So himself, with support from the NWTF, have a website called thewildturkeylab.com. That's where you can get kind of more into the nitty gritty, like actual research articles are posted. You can actually read the manuscripts if you want. And then also he does a good job of breaking them down in layman's terms. And then his Turkey Tuesday posts are on there. And so in my opinion, those two resources, you can learn about the wild turkey and a lot about research and science and what's going on.
There you go, my friends. Hey, that's a good one. Thank you very much for your time. If there's anything that you guys need to talk about, you're more than welcome on this podcast anytime. If you guys who are listening like the How to Hunt Turkey podcast, do me a huge favor. Go to Spotify, go to iTunes, wherever you download this episode, subscribe to it, give it a 5-star review. And we can also be found on YouTube as well, How to Hunt Turkey. Patrick, appreciate your time. Have a good rest of your day.
Thanks for having me, Dan. Enjoyed it.